What's up, everybody? It's Nick Gaze with Springboard Creative, and welcome to episode 3 of SBC Digest. This week, with it having been National Girls and Women in Sports Day, we want to take a look at what's going on in women's sports and see if possibly they might be the savior of Olympic sports along the way. So, let's dive in. Women's sports are surging, and while there's some folks that might not agree with me on that, I brought receipts and we're going to take a look at what has happened in the last year and a half or so, why it's happened, and what comes next. So this run has been absolutely epic, and it's, boosted viewership and ticket sales and ad revenue, sponsorships, all that kind of stuff. And we really haven't seen a run like this, at least in America, in about 25 years, really since the 1999 World Cup that was hosted here when USA famously won and had 90,000 fans there at the game. So it is doing something that we really haven't seen in a while and is kind of uncharted territory. So how did we get there? Well, there are some key events, and the first probably really big thing was the Nebraska volleyball match that was held at Memorial Stadium. 92,000 plus fans, and obviously that's a huge volleyball community, but everybody showed up, and that was kind of what kicked this whole thing off. So we went from there to Iowa women's basketball, kind of doing the same thing, 55,000 fans out there at Kinnick Stadium, and then it just kept growing. We took all of that, obviously, partly the Caitlin Clark effect. We went into the women's Final Four where for the first time ever, they had more viewers for the championship game than the men had, and it was by like over 4 million viewers. So not a small number, big economic impact, almost $33 million to that area. So, it just kind of kept snowballing from there. Took that into NBA All-Star Weekend, where we had Sabrina Ionescu against Steph Curry in the three-point shootout that, drew a ton of attention. And the NBA's numbers have been lagging. And in fact, this year they asked Caitlin Clark to participate. She declined, saying she wanted the WNBA All-Star Game next year in Indianapolis to be her first three-point shootout. But it's actually going to show that women's sports are doing so well, the WA in particular, that the NBA is actually kind of leaning on them to pull some viewership over there. We got into the summer, or approaching the summer, we had the Olympic swim trials held right here in Indianapolis. Record-breaking numbers, tons of fans, just off the charts there, and that kind of catapulted us up into the Summer Olympics, where for the first time since 1924 or whatever, the first modern Olympics, that women made up 50% of the athletes, and then the U.S. women actually took home more gold medals, 60% of them, than the men for the U.S. So we had all of that going on, coupled with the WNBA regular season that was just blowing up all the way into the playoffs. We had games having to get moved to bigger venues, record merchandise sales and food sales and tickets and viewers and everything else, way off the charts. And then we kind of capped the year with Time Magazine and Sports Illustrated both having their Athlete of the Year, Sports Person of the Year being women, and that's not something that we've seen very often. So we had Caitlin Clark and Simone Biles, who had a historic Olympics of her own, and really just kind of capping this big run that we had that was about 15, 18 months long. So when we look at all that information, we say, well, why did it happen? And there's a couple reasons. First was really aggressive marketing from all of these organizations, these women's teams and leagues, really pushing their product. The second is that we had elite talent really raise the level of play, which had been a knock on women's activities for a long time. You had Simone Biles doing things, again, that have never been done in gymnastics. Caitlin Clark just blowing it up, with their long distance threes and all that kind of stuff. So the level of talent had really increased there as we went through that kind of stuff. We had a lot more issues, I think, with familiarity and how that breeds loyalty compared to the men's game. So we had less roster turnover, less of the transfer portal, less people going to the NBA early or that kind of thing, where a lot of fans, particularly of college sports, have kind of felt like, I can't latch on to anyone because my team doesn't exist anymore. It's just this constant thing that's in flux. So I think that stability really helped them and helped people latch on to them. And I think the last big thing there is, this sort of purity of the game, the passion, where fans have really become disillusioned with the men, with the complaining and the fouls and they sort of don't really seem into it. It seems more about money and extreme salaries, and the women were a little more fundamental and back to sort of the roots of the games. And I think that really has drawn people in because they became disillusioned with some of the other stuff that was going on. And then the personalities were just absolutely huge. Obviously, the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, tension and back and forth has been huge. You had a lot of other college athletes, Livy Dunn in the NIL space, that have elevated this. But one of the biggest was Alona Maher, who kind of put rugby center stage at the Olympics, just massive. And, when they say she got more views than Taylor Swift, they're not really joking, and it's not even close. In fact, she got about 3 times as many views as Taylor Swift in the midst of her, record-breaking Eras tour. So when you talk about that kind of impact and what these personalities are doing and drawing people to the sport, it's absolutely massive. And I think we haven't seen that as much on the men's side recently. So what comes next? Well, we're seeing this real big continued investment now. In fact, we just had an announcement about a new women's agency that's exclusively focused on women's athletes and women's sports. And, what that's going to do. We got Allison Felix backing it, one of track and field's greatest stars. So, we're starting to see this just really big push into women's sports more. We're seeing increased ad buys, sponsorships. Obviously, the NIL dollars and that have gone up, but now we're seeing that, hey, they're going to have some equity there in the revenue sharing, and so that's going to give us a little more balance. And we're seeing a lot of private funding because of these things like personality and the other attention, where we've got Flavor Flav, personally helping to fund the U.S. women's water polo team, and Michelle Kang, who's a famous woman business owner, owns some sports teams in Europe, and she's funding the rugby sevens in part because of Alona Maher. So, we're seeing a lot more of that kind of investment in the women's sports and teams from individuals and corporations. And as this pushes downhill, there is going to be this knock-on effect, right? We are going to see it start to trickle into other Olympic sports and other men's sports. And, if we look at some of the data, these brands are saying, yeah, it is mostly positive what we're seeing as far as our brand when we invest in this, when we sponsor athletes. And so that's really helping to boost that because they're getting the confidence to continue doing that. So we're going to see more of this. We're already seeing women's Olympic sports getting a boost. And I think you're going to see a lot more in men's Olympic sports, especially as we head into hosting the games in 28 in Los Angeles. So all of this stuff is going to continue to build all of these groups up. What does it mean? Well, it means don't give up. It can be a real disheartening time, especially for those involved in Olympic sports right now, whether it's at the collegiate level or they're working with semi-professionals or even in youth sports. It can be real tough. But I think there really is a bright spot in the future. And we're looking at things, as long as we continue to promote women athletes and sports and girls athletes, that we can see this push back downhill. So I think, getting more positive role models out there is going to inspire more young girls and boys to continue in their sports, where we have really high attrition rates in youth sports, by the time we hit the teenage years. And in fact, for girls, by the time they hit about 14, they are quitting sports at twice the rate of boys. So I think this surge in women's sports is going to help bring those numbers up, which for all of our youth sports coaches out there is really going to give them some confidence that, hey, our numbers can stabilize or maybe they can grow and we can kind of move forward doing some of the things that we want to do in helping these young people. So the best way to kind of keep doing that is you've got to be active in telling the story of your sport, your team, your athletes, whatever that is, right? Stories matter. That's what people connect with more than the actual play or the game or the widget or whatever it is, right? It's about the connection with the people. So you got to be able to do that. You got to push that out. And then go ahead, reach out to some of those folks that you think might have the means. Yes, you might not get a billionaire to invest in your team, but there are plenty of folks out there with plenty of money that can help support your cause. The big thing is, why do they do it? And it can't just be for a financial investment, right? This isn't a stock. So you've got to kind of pull on the heartstrings. You've got to appeal to some of their other senses and say, look, there is a ton of value here when we are talking about participating in sports and how it breeds more Fortune 500 executives, or how companies want to hire college athletes more because they know how to represent an institution. They know how to show up. They know how to do hard work. They know how to learn. Those things are all important. And when you can get other folks to understand that and break through some of the stigmas, that's going to be really important. And then the second thing is you got to explain how the money that they may invest can actually support those goals. So it's not just, hey, we don't have funds, come help us, right? You got to explain what that really means. And I think you can't go over the top. You can't say, well, we need new hot tubs, right? It's got to be about providing opportunity, maybe getting them new experiences, maybe getting them something that gives them a competitive advantage or equalizer that they may not have had. Maybe it's something that really protects their mental health or their physical health. All of these things matter, right? So if you can show how that funding directly impacts all of those other things that we mentioned, kind of above that, that's going to be really important. So I think we're actually moving in a really positive direction despite all of the chatter that's going on. If we can kind of stay the course, keep our head down, keep grinding, and really start promoting what's going on with that. And hey, thanks Caitlin Clark, I think, in large part, because, she might be one of the few people who have actually helped save Olympic sports across the board, not just women's basketball. So thanks, everybody. Have a great week.